I thought my grief couldn't get worse, until I discovered my son had cut me out of his will. Then, at his funeral, a letter changed everything, revealing a secret I never expected. What I uncovered wasn't just betrayal. It was a dangerous plan that had taken my son's life. Hit subscribe if you believe life always finds a way to balance the scales. Because this story proves it. I never imagined I'd feel this hollow, standing in that cold, sterile office while a lawyer read my own son's will. My knees shook, and I had to grip the edge of the chair as the words echoed in my ears. Everything is left to Theresa Harrison. Mr. Harrison, you are not listed as a beneficiary. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to laugh, or scream, or fall to the floor and curl into myself. But instead, I just froze. I had spent the last 47 years raising Michael, working long shifts at the garage, teaching him everything I knew about engines, life, and integrity. We had been through thick and thin. His mother's death, the teenage fights, the heartbreaks, the small victories. And now this betrayal cut deeper than anything else ever could. My son, my flesh and blood, had left me nothing. Not even a simple trinket, not even a note. The room was silent except for the soft ticking of the wall clock. My daughter-in-law, Tessa, sat there in a tailored black dress, perfectly poised, eyes slightly downcast, but the smirk on her lips didn't escape me. She looked at me like I was already obsolete, like I had no place in her carefully curated world. I caught the way she shifted her legs and how her manicured hand lightly rested on her purse, the faintest indication of triumph hiding behind a mask of polite decorum. She was savoring this moment. The lawyer continued reading. The house at Pinecrest Lane, all vehicles, financial accounts, and personal belongings are to be transferred to Theresa Harrison. Any sentimental items of Michael's choosing are to be distributed according to her discretion. His voice was calm, measured, almost mechanical, but every syllable felt like a hammer striking my chest. I couldn't understand. Michael had always been close to me. We shared mornings in the garage, nights watching old baseball games on TV, and weekends fixing up his old Chevy. Even in his 20s, when Tessa came into the picture, he'd called me frequently, asked for my advice, wanted me involved in his life. And yet, here I was, sitting in an office full of lawyers and family acquaintances, realizing that in the eyes of his last testament, I was invisible. I wanted to speak, I wanted to ask, why? Why would he do this? But my voice betrayed me. It trembled and stuck somewhere in my throat. Instead, I sat frozen, watching Tessa whisper something to her friend across the room. I caught the words, barely audible, but sharp and cutting. He won't be a problem anymore. The sentence lodged itself in my skull like a jagged stone. He won't be a problem anymore. My son had died just a week ago in a construction accident, and now she treated me like I was a nuisance, a shadow of the man who had raised her husband. My entire world had shifted in one cruel instant, and I couldn't make sense of it. After the meeting, the formalities ended and everyone started to leave. Tessa gave me a glance, a quick, calculating glance, and whispered directly into my ear, low enough that the lawyer didn't hear. "You have 30 days to get out, old man." Her breath smelled faintly of expensive perfume, and it hit me like ice water in my chest. I nodded mechanically, too numb to protest, but every word she said burned into me. She wanted me gone, erased, forgotten. I stumbled out into the bright sunlight, the city streets buzzing with life as if nothing had changed. Everyone around me was living, laughing, hurrying somewhere, completely unaware that my son was gone and my family had just betrayed me. I leaned against my car, trying to process the humiliation and the grief that pressed on my chest like a lead weight. How could my own flesh and blood allow this to happen? How could he have let her convince him to cut me out entirely? Driving home was a blur. Every stoplight, every honk of another driver, every glimpse of strangers' faces felt like a cruel reminder that my life had shifted into a world where I no longer mattered. I walked into my small, modest house, the place I had built with my own hands, the home where Michael had grown up, and I felt emptier than I had in years. The walls seemed too quiet, the shadows too long, and the air too still. I sat in my old recliner, the leather worn and familiar, and I closed my eyes. I tried to remember the good times. Michael and I fixing the old Camaro on weekends, greasy hands and laughter echoing through the garage. But even those memories carried a bitter taste now. Tessa had poisoned them before she even arrived in our lives. She had wrapped herself around him, influenced him, and ultimately turned him against me, or at least coerced him to appear as though he had. Hours passed, though I didn't notice. I wandered the house, touching the furniture, staring at photos on the walls, and occasionally looking at Michael's childhood trophies. I stopped at the big, oak toolbox in the corner of the garage. I had helped him build it years ago, sanding each surface, applying layers of varnish together, teaching him patience, teaching him pride in workmanship. For some reason, I felt drawn to it now, like some instinct was telling me that my son hadn't entirely abandoned me. The toolbox was left on my porch that day. I had no idea why. Tessa hadn't said a word about it. It wasn't much, just a large wooden box, its hinges slightly rusted, with Michael's initials carved into the lid. Something compelled me to open it, though. My fingers shook as I lifted the top. Inside, amidst the neatly arranged wrenches and screwdrivers, was a single envelope. It wasn't just any envelope. It was thick, cream-colored, and carefully sealed with a strip of tape. Written on the front in Michael's familiar handwriting were the words, "Date. Only open if something happens to me." I froze. My breath caught in my chest. How had I never seen this before? Why had Michael left it like this? My hands trembled as I lifted it out. The envelope was heavier than I expected. I held it like it was fragile, like it contained some precious, dangerous truth. I sat down on the porch steps, staring at it, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and finally, I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. Michael's handwriting, precise and slightly rushed, jumped out at me, and I could almost hear his voice as I read. "Dad," it began. "If you're reading this, then something has happened. I need you to know the truth before anyone else gets to you. Tessa, she's not who you think she is. She's been manipulating me, controlling me, making me believe I had to cut you out. I didn't want this. Dad, I tried to fight it, but I was scared. She's dangerous, and she has a plan that you need to know about." My hands tightened around the letter. I couldn't breathe. My son had been afraid. Afraid of Tessa. Afraid for what? My mind raced. There's a USB drive hidden in the false bottom of this toolbox. It has everything. Proof of her schemes, evidence you'll need. I've also left copies of some bank statements and photos. Dad, please, don't trust anyone else. Especially Tessa. If anything happens to me, follow the instructions. You'll know what to do. I wish I could have explained in person. I love you. I stared at the words over and over, my mind a whirlwind of confusion, grief, and slowly, a burning anger. Michael hadn't abandoned me. He had left me a lifeline. And the thought that Tessa had orchestrated something that had led to my son's death, sent chills down my spine. I dug into the toolbox, my heart hammering. There it was, just as Michael said, a false bottom, neatly fitted, holding a small USB drive, a few crumpled photos, and a handful of bank statements. I picked them up, my fingers trembling, realizing that my son had trusted me to finish what he couldn't. For the first time since Michael's death, I felt a flicker of purpose. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't forgotten. But the path ahead was dangerous, and I could feel it in my bones. The person who had smiled at me during the will reading, the one who had whispered that I had 30 days to leave, was not the woman I thought she was. And now, with Michael's letter and evidence in my hands, I had to decide, what would I do next? I looked out over the neighborhood, the sun slipping below the horizon, casting long shadows over the quiet streets. For a moment, I thought about walking away, living quietly, pretending I hadn't found anything. But Michael hadn't left me this for peace. He had left me this for justice. And I knew that no matter how impossible it seemed, I couldn't turn back. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my garage, examining each piece of evidence, reading and rereading Michael's letter, piecing together a puzzle I had only just begun to understand. Tessa had underestimated me, assumed that grief would make me weak, that fear would keep me silent. But she didn't know my son, and she certainly didn't know me. By the time the clock struck 2 in the morning, a plan was forming in my mind. I would honor my son, I would find the truth, and I would make sure that whoever had caused him harm would pay. For the first time since I lost Michael, I felt alive. The fire of purpose burned through me, fueled by love, grief, and righteous anger. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was not done yet. Michael's story wasn't finished, and neither was mine. The next morning, I woke with the weight of the letter and the USB drive pressing on my chest like a physical force. I couldn't eat. I couldn't drink. I couldn't sleep. All I could do was sit in the garage, staring at the toolbox, feeling a mixture of grief, anger, and a strange sense of responsibility. Michael had trusted me with the truth, and I had to honor that trust, no matter how dangerous it might be. I plugged the USB drive into my old laptop, the fan whirring as it scanned the files. The first thing I saw were photographs. Photos of Tessa with a man I didn't recognize, standing near Michael's construction site. They were casual, almost innocent looking, but I could see the tension in their faces, the furtive glances, the way their hands lingered on things that didn't belong to them. And then there were screenshots, messages between Tessa and this man, whose name was Ryan Mercer. The messages were worse than I expected. They were planning, coordinating, plotting. Everything will go smoothly once he's out of the picture. One read. I'll take care of it. Don't worry about a thing. I felt bile rise in my throat. My son had been speaking the truth. Something had been planned. My hands shook as I scrolled through hundreds of messages, documents, bank transfers, everything pointing to Tessa manipulating Michael, siphoning money, and keeping him isolated from me. And then, a folder labeled Insurance caught my eye. My stomach dropped. It contained records of a life insurance policy that Michael had never mentioned to me, with Tessa listed as the primary beneficiary and Ryan Mercer as an accomplice in the paperwork. My mind reeled. Was this why Michael had been scared in the weeks before his death? Had he realized something was seriously wrong? I could almost hear his voice, faint in my memory, whispering, "Dad, be careful. Don't trust anyone." I couldn't sit there anymore. I needed to move, to think, to act. But first, I had to make sure I wasn't being paranoid. I started calling people. Michael's old coworkers, friends from the garage, anyone who might have noticed unusual behavior. Some were hesitant, unsure if I should be digging into this, but one by one, the pieces began to fall into place. One of Michael's coworkers, a young man named Jeff, remembered Michael arguing on the phone a few weeks before the accident. He was upset, Jeff said, voice low. Kept saying, "I can't let them get away with this, Dad." But he didn't tell me what this was. He looked scared, really scared. And the day before, I saw Tessa meeting with Ryan Mercer at the site office. They weren't supposed to be there together. The pieces clicked together in my head, like a puzzle I hadn't realized I was holding. Tessa had been working with Ryan Mercer, a man with access to Michael's finances, and they were planning something. Something that had ended with Michael dead. My chest tightened, and I felt a surge of fury. How could anyone be so cruel, so calculating? My son had trusted me, and they had betrayed him in the most monstrous way possible. I spent the next day tracing the bank statements, cross-referencing transfers, and trying to understand what Tessa and Ryan had been doing. There were withdrawals, purchases, and transfers that made no sense, large sums of money vanishing without explanation. I could almost see Michael in my mind, sitting at the kitchen table late at night, trying to figure out how to stop them without tipping them off. And then the realization hit me. He had left me the USB drive for a reason. He had known that someone had to continue his work if anything happened to him. The more I dug, the more evidence I found. Tessa had been systematically taking over Michael's finances, isolating him from friends and family, and manipulating him into signing documents that favored her exclusively. And Ryan Mercer, he was no innocent bystander. He was deeply involved, likely helping her cover tracks, possibly even planning the accident that took my son's life. I felt a chill run down my spine. My son hadn't died in a random accident. He had died because of them. My fists clenched around the edge of the table, nails digging into my palms. I wanted to scream, to call the police immediately, but I knew I needed more. I needed proof that would stand up to scrutiny, proof that would protect me and expose them. That night, I returned to Michael's house, the garage where we had spent so many weekends fixing cars and talking about life felt different now. The shadows were longer, the silence heavier, but I couldn't let fear stop me. I had to find more evidence, and I had a suspicion about where to look. Michael had been meticulous. If he had been scared, he would have left more than just the USB drive. I started rifling through the workshop drawers, examining every nook and cranny. It was exhausting, my back aching, hands scraped from old metal edges. But then I found a small hidden compartment under the workbench. Inside was a second envelope, sealed and labeled. For Dad. If something happens, use with care. My heart pounded as I opened it. Inside were photographs of Tessa and Ryan at various locations, hotels, restaurants, and even near the construction site on the day of Michael's accident. There were notes, scribbled in Michael's handwriting, detailing observations, phone numbers, dates, and times. It was as if he had been preparing a dossier for me, anticipating that I would need to pick up the pieces if something went wrong. I sat there, overwhelmed, flipping through the photos and notes, feeling both pride and sorrow. Pride that my son had thought ahead, had trusted me to continue his fight. Sorrow that he had been scared enough to leave these instructions, that he hadn't lived to see justice done. The weight of grief pressed on me, but beneath it, a simmering determination began to take hold. The next few days were a blur of investigation. I started discreetly observing Tessa, taking notes, recording small details. She was careful, always polite, always calculating. But people make mistakes when they believe no one is watching. I began documenting her comings and goings, her interactions with Ryan, any suspicious behavior that might confirm Michael's suspicions. It wasn't easy. I was 67, retired, not exactly trained for this kind of investigation. But grief and anger made me persistent. I remembered my years in the garage, the patience required to rebuild engines, the focus needed to diagnose complex problems. This was similar, just human and far more dangerous. I couldn't fail, not now. One evening, I returned to Michael's old workshop and discovered a small device taped under the workbench. A dash cam. My hands shook as I realized it had been recording. Michael had been cautious, anticipating that Tessa and Ryan might try something. and he had set up a way for me to see the truth, if he couldn't be there. I plugged it into my laptop and watched the footage. There they were, Tessa and Ryan, arguing heatedly. Tessa's voice was sharp, almost cruel. "He's too close to figuring out everything. We can't let him ruin this." Ryan hesitated, then nodded. "It'll be fine. He won't see it coming." I felt bile rise in my throat. My son had been right. They were planning something, and I had proof. My son had died, and they had smiled, confident that no one would ever know. I knew then that I couldn't trust the police to act without evidence. I needed to prepare, to gather enough proof that no one could ignore. I spent days meticulously organizing the USB drive, photographs, notes, and dash cam footage. Every piece of information brought the picture into sharper focus. Michael had been under siege, manipulated, threatened, and ultimately, left vulnerable to their cruelty. I remembered the last words of Michael's letter, urging me not to trust anyone, especially Tessa, and I realized he had left me with the most important weapons: knowledge. Knowledge that could bring justice, even if it took everything I had to see it through. The first night I decided to confront reality, I sat alone in Michael's workshop, surrounded by evidence, letters, and photographs. The shadows cast by the dim light of the single bulb above seemed to stretch across the walls, almost reaching out to me. I could feel the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders, heavier than anything I had ever carried. But beneath the weight, there was purpose. My son had been silenced, but his voice remained through these documents, this evidence, this letter. I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was planning. I was preparing. I was ready to honor his last wishes, no matter the danger. I thought about Tessa, imagining her smug face, thinking she had won, thinking she had erased me from Michael's life completely. She had underestimated one thing: the man who raised Michael, the man who had taught him everything about integrity, patience, and persistence. I might be old, I might be retired, but I was not powerless. And so I made a promise. To myself, to Michael, and to the memory of a son who had been too good for this world. I would see this through. I would expose Tessa and Ryan for what they truly were. I would bring justice for Michael, and I would make sure that their deceit and betrayal would not go unpunished. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the workshop, going over every photograph, every note, every message. I memorized phone numbers, addresses, dates, and times. I planned the next steps carefully, methodically, like I had once taught Michael to plan every repair before touching an engine. Every detail mattered. Every piece of evidence mattered. By the time the sun began to rise, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink, I knew the path ahead would be long, dangerous, and exhausting. But I also knew one thing with absolute certainty: I was not alone. Michael had left me with everything I needed to uncover the truth, to seek justice, and to honor his memory. I looked out over the quiet streets, the first light of dawn reflecting off the windows of houses that had no idea of the storm that was about to descend. I clenched my fists, my resolve hardening. I didn't know exactly what I would face, but I knew I couldn't turn back. Not now. Not ever. Michael's story wasn't finished, and neither was mine. And I was ready to fight. I didn't sleep that night, and the next morning, I woke with a single thought hammering through my mind. I needed the police to see what I had found. But when I went to the precinct, I was met with polite skepticism. "Mr. Harrison," the detective said, "Michael's death has already been ruled an accident. There's nothing here to investigate." I could feel the anger rising, hot and dangerous, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Detective," I said, "I have evidence that suggests otherwise. My son left me documents, photographs, messages, everything. You don't have the whole picture." The detective sighed, leaning back in his chair, clearly uninterested. "Look," I get it. You're grieving. But unless you have concrete proof of foul play, there's nothing we can do. Accidents happen. Accidents. My stomach turned. My son had been careful, meticulous, precise, and they had taken him from me while smiling, thinking it was just an accident. I clenched my fists, trying to control the rage that threatened to make me say things I would regret. I left the station, realizing I couldn't rely on them. If I wanted justice for Michael, I would have to find it myself. I started by retracing Michael's steps in the weeks before his death. I visited the construction site where he had been working, asking questions, observing, and talking to anyone who might remember something unusual. I learned that Michael had been arguing with someone over the phone on the day he died. A coworker, a man named Lewis, mentioned seeing Michael look frustrated and worried, his hands shaking slightly as he spoke. Louise had assumed it was a personal issue, nothing more. But I knew better. I could feel it. Michael had been scared, and he hadn't told anyone besides me. I thought about the dash cam footage, the letters, the messages. They all pointed to Tessa and Ryan. I had to find them, or at least confirm their movements and interactions. I started watching Tessa from a distance, taking mental notes of her routines. She was careful, but no one is perfect. She had habits, moments of carelessness, patterns that I could use. I began documenting every meeting, every phone call I could see or hear, every unusual transaction. The deeper I dug, the more I realized just how clever she had been, how long she had been manipulating my son and controlling every aspect of his life. Then I remembered something from Michael's letter. A mention of a shed, a place where he had kept tools, records, and secret observations. I hadn't paid much attention at first, assuming it was just another workspace, but now it felt like a lead I couldn't ignore. That evening, after Tessa had left for a charity event, I returned to the property. The shed was unlocked. Michael's presence seemed to linger in the air, the faint smell of oil and grease, the faint hum of tools left in perfect order. Inside, I found rope fibers caught on a hook, some partially frayed. My heart raced. They looked familiar, like the type used in construction safety harnesses. And then I realized they matched what had been found near the site of Michael's accident. My pulse quickened. Could it be that someone had tampered with his equipment? I had to be careful. I couldn't leave evidence that would point to me, but I had to document everything. I took photographs and carefully bagged samples in a small plastic container I had brought with me. As I was leaving, the door creaked and I froze. Tessa. She had come back early. I ducked behind the workbench, holding my breath, hoping she wouldn't notice me. She walked in, eyes scanning the shed, and muttered under her breath about cleaning up some things. I listened, heart pounding, as she rummaged through papers and tools. She spoke on the phone, her voice sharp. He's getting suspicious. Make sure he doesn't find anything. We can't risk him ruining everything. I stayed hidden until she left, then slowly exhaled, my body trembling. It was worse than I had imagined. They had been planning something, and Michael had known. They had wanted him gone, and now I realized, with a cold certainty, they had succeeded. The next day, I returned to Michael's workshop to review the dashcam footage again. I had watched it a dozen times, but this time I noticed subtle things I hadn't before. The way Ryan's hands lingered on certain documents, the quick, nervous glances, the whispered words between him and Tessa. They were coordinating. They were careful, but not careful enough. I knew then that I had to confront them, but I couldn't do it blindly. I needed leverage, undeniable evidence that would make them slip up, and then an idea struck me. I could use the dashcam footage, the letters, the bank statements. I could create a record so complete that they couldn't deny it. But I had to be smart. I had to think like Michael, meticulous, cautious, and strategic. Over the next few days, I pieced together a timeline of Tessa and Ryan's movements, cross-referencing it with construction site records, credit card transactions, and Michael's notes. It was exhausting, my hands sore from writing and writing timelines, my eyes burning from staring at spreadsheets and photographs. But I kept going. Michael had left me this mission, and I couldn't fail him. Then, late one night, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Among the files Michael had hidden was a detailed account of Tessa and Ryan's plans. A step-by-step outline of how they had intended to manipulate Michael, control the finances, and eventually remove any obstacles, including him. The final note was chilling. Once he's gone, nothing can stop us. I felt a wave of grief and rage wash over me. My son had been taken from me, and they had smiled while doing it. But I also felt a spark of clarity. They had left evidence, and Michael had trusted me to find it. They had assumed grief would weaken me, that fear would keep me silent. They were wrong. I began formulating a plan. I couldn't go to the police again without more concrete evidence. I needed witnesses, records, and a way to corner them without risking my own safety. I started visiting Michael's old coworkers again, asking questions carefully, gauging what they knew and what they could corroborate. Slowly, I built a picture of the extent of Tessa and Ryan's manipulation, how they had isolated Michael, controlled his decisions, and orchestrated events leading to his death. One evening, as I was reviewing the photographs in the dim light of the garage, I realized there was one more piece missing, a direct confrontation between Tessa and Ryan that I could use to confirm their intentions. I remembered a small hotel they had frequented, mentioned in one of Michael's notes. I drove there, cautiously observing from a distance, taking notes and photographs as they arrived together. They were careful, whispering to each other, laughing, but I could see the tension, the undercurrent of guilt or fear that betrayed their intentions. It was enough. I had the timeline, the messages, the photographs, and now, direct evidence of their coordination. I felt a grim satisfaction, but also a renewed sadness. Michael wasn't here to see this. He had trusted me to finish what he couldn't. And now it was up to me to make sure his story was told, his memory honored, and justice served. As I returned home that night, the streets quiet and empty, I felt a new sense of purpose. I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was preparing. I had a mission, and every step I took brought me closer to the truth. I organized the evidence meticulously, making sure nothing was misplaced, nothing overlooked. I couldn't afford mistakes, not when so much was at stake. The following days were a blur of observation, planning, and preparation. I mapped out Tessa and Ryan's routines, anticipating their next moves, ready to act if necessary. I felt like a detective, a strategist, and a father avenging his son all at once. The house, the garage, Michael's letters, they were my arsenal, and I would use them wisely. Late one night, I finally allowed myself a moment of reflection. I sat in Michael's old recliner, staring at the walls, thinking about the boy who had once clung to my leg, the young man who had confided in me, and the man who had trusted me with the most important secret of all. Tears rolled down my cheeks, but beneath the sorrow, a determination burned brighter than ever. I would see this through. Michael had given me the tools, the evidence, and the trust. I would honor him. The next morning, I made a decision. I would confront Tessa, but not recklessly. I needed her to slip, to reveal her guilt without realizing it. I started crafting scenarios, thinking about how to use the evidence strategically, how to make her reveal everything without putting myself in danger. It was a delicate balance, but I had learned patience over a lifetime of working with engines and machines. Now I would apply the same patience to human nature, to deceit, and to justice. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of control. The grief was still there, heavy and raw, but it had been tempered by purpose. I had a mission. I had evidence. And I had the trust of the one person who mattered most, my son. As I closed the garage door behind me that evening, I looked out over the quiet neighborhood. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the streets. I knew Tessa and Ryan thought they had won, that they had eliminated any obstacles, that they had silenced Michael forever. But they were wrong. They had underestimated me, the father who had raised the boy they tried to destroy. And soon, they would realize that no matter how careful they were, no one outsmarts the truth. I didn't know exactly what the next step would be, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would find it. Michael's death would not be in vain, and the people responsible would face justice, whether they were ready for it or not. The next few days felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of fire. Every step I took, every phone call I made, every observation of Tessa and Ryan had to be precise. I couldn't afford a single mistake. Not with the evidence I had gathered. Not with the stakes so high. One wrong move, and they could vanish, destroy the evidence, or worse. But I couldn't wait for the police to take action. I had learned they wouldn't move without undeniable proof. I had to force the truth into the open myself. I reached out to Detective Laura Green, a woman I had met at the precinct once during Michael's paperwork. She had a sharp mind and a reputation for digging deeper when others didn't care. I didn't tell her everything at first, just enough to pique her interest. "Detective, I have something you need to see. Something that's going to change how you view Michael's death," I said. Her eyes narrowed, a mix of curiosity and caution. "Bring it to me," she said, voice steady but sharp. I met her at a small diner, the kind with vinyl booths and the faint smell of coffee and fried eggs. I laid out the USB drive, the photographs, and Michael's letters on the table. She studied them carefully, her fingers hovering over the photographs. Her expression shifted from professional detachment to concern. "This is substantial," she said quietly. "Where did you get all of this?" I told her part of the story, careful not to reveal everything I had uncovered just yet. "My son left me these," I said, tapping the USB drive. He knew something was wrong. He was scared. And now I have to finish what he couldn't. Laura leaned back, eyes scanning the diner, then back to me. "If this is true, we're dealing with fraud, coercion, and possibly murder. I'll reopen the case, but we need concrete evidence, timing, witnesses, something that puts them directly at fault." I nodded, already planning the next steps. I had most of what she needed, but I had to bring it all together in a way that left no room for doubt. Over the next few days, Laura and I coordinated our efforts. She analyzed timestamps on the dash cam footage, phone records, and financial transactions. I observed Tessa and Ryan from a distance, noting every meeting, every phone call, every suspicious activity. It wasn't long before I noticed patterns. Tessa would meet Ryan at discreet locations, whispering and exchanging papers. She had become more cautious, but even the most careful people make mistakes. One afternoon, I followed them to a storage facility on the outskirts of town. They were so focused on their conversation, so confident that no one was watching, that they didn't notice me jotting down the unit number, the time, the direction they left. Every detail mattered. Then, Laura suggested setting up a controlled confrontation. "We need to catch them off guard," she said. "They need to reveal their intent without realizing it, and we need it recorded." I agreed, though my heart pounded at the thought of facing them directly. I was 67, grieving my son, and yet I felt a strange clarity, a sense of purpose that had replaced the despair I had carried for weeks. The day of the confrontation, I prepared carefully. Every piece of evidence was organized, every photograph cataloged, every note and message cross-referenced. I would confront Tessa first, using the documents to provoke a reaction. Ryan would be nearby, and if he tried to intervene, the dash cam and Laura's team would be ready. I walked into Tessa's home with measured steps, the evidence concealed in a folder under my arm. She greeted me with that same calculated smile, eyes flickering with curiosity. "Frank," she said, voice sweet but sharp, "what brings you here?" I handed her the folder. "I think you know exactly why I'm here," I said quietly. "I have everything. Messages, bank statements, photographs, dash cam footage. I know what you and Ryan were planning." Her eyes narrowed, the smile faltering for the first time. She stepped back, voice trembling slightly, though she tried to maintain her composure. "Frank, I don't know what you're talking about." I leaned in, keeping my voice calm but firm. "Don't lie to me. You were manipulating Michael. You were controlling him. And now he's dead. I have proof of everything." Tessa's facade cracked. "You don't understand? He made his own choices." "He wanted to cut you out." Her voice rose, panic seeping in. "It wasn't my fault." I shook my head. "You think anyone believes that? I have letters, messages, photographs, all of it. You can't deny what's there." At that moment, Ryan appeared at the doorway, surprised and angry. He didn't expect me to confront them. "Frank, what the hell?" he started, but I held up a hand. "Stay back," I said. "You're both in over your heads. The truth is out, and it's only a matter of time before the authorities see it all." Tessa's eyes widened in fear. She whispered something to Ryan, but I could hear it. "We need to get rid of this." I realized then how dangerous they truly were. They had assumed I was weak, that grief would keep me passive. But they had underestimated me. And they had also underestimated Michael's foresight. Laura and her team had positioned themselves nearby, recording everything. Tessa and Ryan's attempts to intimidate me, their arguments, their slips and confessions, all captured in real time. I could feel the tension, the danger, the weight of what was happening. But I also felt a sense of grim satisfaction. Michael had left me the tools, and I was using them exactly as he intended. After what felt like hours but was only minutes, Tessa finally broke down completely. "Fine," she yelled, voice cracking. "Yes, we planned it." We didn't mean for him to. I didn't think he would." Ryan panicked, trying to grab something from the counter, but Laura stepped in, her badge flashing. "Step away from the evidence. Both of you are under arrest." The chaos that followed was almost surreal. Ryan tried to flee, racing to his truck, but the police had already blocked the exits. He crashed trying to escape, and officers quickly apprehended him. Tessa's pleas and protests went unheard, drowned out by the weight of undeniable evidence. Standing there, watching them being taken away, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. Justice had finally been set in motion, but it hadn't brought Michael back. The house, the life insurance, the money, they could never replace the son I had lost. Over the next few weeks, the case went public. The news outlets covered the story, painting Tessa and Ryan as manipulative, deceitful, and ultimately responsible for Michael's death. The will was overturned, all assets returned to me, just as Michael had originally intended. I moved into Michael's house, but it felt hollow without him. Every room held memories, both happy and painful. Yet there was a sense of closure, of purpose restored. I had followed Michael's instructions, uncovered the truth, and made sure that the people who had harmed him were held accountable. It was the least I could do to honor his memory, to validate the trust he had placed in me when he was alive. As I settled into the house, I found myself returning to the workshop more and more. The familiar smell of oil and metal, the hum of machinery, the memories of weekends spent fixing engines and talking about life. It was comforting. And then, tucked behind a photo frame on the workbench, I found another envelope, smaller this time, addressed simply, "For Dad," my last words. I opened it with trembling hands. Michael's handwriting, neat and precise as always, filled the paper. "Dad, I'm sorry for the distance. I wish I could have protected myself better, and I wish I could have stayed longer. But I hope this helps you, and I hope it brings justice. You were always the best part of my life. I love you, and I trust you to do the right thing." I sat there, tears streaming down my face, reading and rereading the letter. For the first time since his death, I felt a sense of peace, a sense of purpose. I wasn't just a grieving father anymore. I was a man who had fought for truth, who had honored his son's memory, and who had taken the first steps toward healing. I decided then that the workshop wouldn't just be a place for memories. It would be a place for life, for purpose, for giving back. I began planning a program for local teens, teaching them automotive skills, patience, and integrity, values Michael had always admired. I would name it the Mike Harrison Garage, a tribute to the son I had loved and lost, and the lessons he had left behind. Every day, as I worked alongside these kids, guiding them through repairs, listening to their stories, and teaching them the skills my son had loved, I felt a connection to Michael stronger than ever. He had left me more than evidence and letters. He had left me the opportunity to continue his legacy, to make something meaningful from tragedy. And as I stood in the workshop one evening, looking at a photo of Michael pinned above the bench, I whispered, "I didn't lose everything, Michael. I just had to find the truth you left behind. And now, I'll make sure the world knows what you meant to me, and what you fought for." I knew the road ahead would still have challenges, memories of grief, moments of sadness, and the shadows of what had happened would never fully disappear. But I also knew that justice had been served, the truth revealed, and a son's trust honored. For the first time in months, I could breathe without the suffocating weight of betrayal pressing on me. I looked out over the streets as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light through the workshop windows. In that quiet moment, surrounded by memories, evidence, and the lingering scent of oil and metal, I felt a fragile but powerful sense of closure. Michael's story had been told. His legacy would live on through this place, through the lives I could touch, and through the lessons he had left for me. And I knew, deep in my heart, that he was smiling down at me, proud that I had seen the truth, honored his memory, and finally found a way to turn grief into purpose. The weeks that followed were a strange mixture of quiet reflection and intense activity. With Tessa and Ryan in custody, the legal battles began. But for the first time, I felt like I had some control over my life again. The grief was still there. It would never fully leave me, but it was tempered by the knowledge that justice had been served. Michael's voice, the one he had left in letters and evidence, guided me every step of the way. I decided to focus on something positive, something lasting. Michael had always loved teaching, sharing what he knew, and working with his hands. So I poured my energy into turning his old workshop into a space for young people, a place where they could learn automotive skills, responsibility, and integrity. I named it the Mike Harrison Garage, a tribute not just to my son, but to the lessons he had left behind. The first day was quiet. A handful of local teens, curious and uncertain, trickled in. I greeted each of them, shaking hands, introducing myself, and sharing a bit of Michael's story. "This is more than just fixing cars," I told them. "It's about patience, precision, and taking responsibility for your work. These are skills that will help you in life, not just in the garage." Some of the teens were skeptical, others eager, but by the end of the day, I could see the spark of interest in their eyes. I watched as they lifted hoods, checked oil, and worked together to troubleshoot problems. I felt a strange joy in showing them how to tighten a bolt correctly, how to read a manual, how to approach a problem logically. It reminded me so much of the weekends spent with Michael, teaching him, laughing, and sharing moments that now seemed almost sacred. Evenings were quieter, more introspective. I would sit alone in the workshop, the smell of oil and metal filling the air, and reread Michael's letters. His handwriting, his voice captured in ink, brought tears to my eyes, but also a sense of closeness I hadn't felt since his death. He had trusted me with so much, and I had honored that trust. The evidence I had found, the confrontation, the arrest of Tessa and Ryan, it all felt like a mission completed, a chapter closed. One day, as I was organizing some tools, I found another envelope tucked in the back of a drawer. I hesitated, unsure if I was ready to open it. But something told me I needed to. With trembling hands, I broke the seal and pulled out a small stack of letters, each carefully labeled and dated. They were addressed to me, but written in a way that suggested Michael had been preparing for every eventuality. Dad, one began. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. I want you to know that I'm proud of you. Proud that you raised me. Proud that you taught me how to work hard and care about what matters. I may be gone, but my trust in you is absolute. You are strong, and you are capable. I know you will find the truth, and I know you will do what's right. I read each letter carefully, feeling his presence in every word. Some contained practical advice, how to handle certain documents, where to find hidden notes, how to approach difficult people. Others were more personal, filled with memories, gratitude, and love. By the time I finished, I felt both sorrow and profound gratitude. Michael had left me not just a mission, but a legacy, and he had given me the strength to carry it forward. The garage slowly became a community hub. Word spread about the Mike Harrison garage, and more teens started coming, curious about cars, but also about the story behind the workshop. I shared Michael's story with them. Not the gory details of deceit and betrayal, but the lessons he had left behind, the values he had taught, and the trust he had placed in me. The kids listened, and I could see them internalizing what I said, learning from a story of love, loss, and resilience. One afternoon, a young man named Tyler, who had been quiet and reserved, approached me. "Mr. Harrison," he said, "I never knew my dad. But working here, it feels like I'm learning from someone who really cares. I want to be better because of what you're teaching me." I felt a lump in my throat. Michael would have been proud. I placed a hand on Tyler's shoulder. "That's all I want. To make a difference, even if it's small. Every lesson you take from here, every skill you learn, is part of what Michael would have wanted." Despite the progress, there were moments when grief returned in waves. Unbidden and sharp, I would catch a glimpse of Michael in the garage, hear his laughter in my mind, or see a letter I had overlooked. Those moments were bittersweet. But I realized that grief, while painful, was also a reminder of love. It meant I had truly cared, truly invested in him, and truly lost something irreplaceable. Legal matters dragged on, but with the evidence I had provided, and the statements from Detective Green, Tessa and Ryan faced serious consequences. The media coverage was relentless, but I stayed focused on the garage, the letters, and the community I was building. Michael's name and legacy became a beacon, a story that inspired not just grief and anger, but action and responsibility. One evening, as the sun dipped low and cast golden light through the workshop windows, I found myself alone, sifting through Michael's tools and letters. A small leather-bound notebook fell from a shelf. I opened it, revealing pages of meticulous notes, sketches, and reflections. Michael had documented everything: the cars we had worked on, the lessons he had learned, the plans for the garage. He had written about dreams, fears, and hope. I sat there, absorbing every word, feeling a profound connection. Michael had left me not just evidence or instructions, but a roadmap for life. I realized then that while he was gone, he had left me the means to carry his spirit forward, to touch lives, and to honor him in every action I took. The garage became my sanctuary, a place where grief transformed into purpose. I watched as the teens learned, grew, and took pride in their work. I guided them, sometimes strictly, sometimes with patience, always keeping Michael's lessons in mind. I saw parallels between my life with him and the lives of these kids, and I felt that in teaching them, I was keeping his memory alive. Months later, I received a letter from the prosecutor handling Tessa and Ryan's case. Both had been convicted of fraud, coercion, and other charges related to Michael's death. Their sentences were long, ensuring that they could never harm anyone else. I felt a mixture of relief and emptiness. Justice had been served, but it had come too late for Michael. I returned home that evening, walking through the quiet streets, feeling the weight of solitude, but also the lightness of purpose. The garage was behind me, tools humming softly, letters stacked neatly, and the memory of Michael ever present. I realized that life had changed, that grief would always linger, but that I had the power to shape the days ahead. One night, I found myself staring at a photo of Michael pinned above the workbench. I whispered, "I did it, son. I found the truth, and I made sure it mattered. Your legacy isn't just in letters or evidence. It's here, in this garage, in these kids, and in everything I do." The weeks turned into months, and the workshop flourished. Teens came not just for the skills, but for guidance, mentorship, and a sense of belonging. I watched them grow, confident and capable, and felt Michael's presence in every lesson, every laugh, every achievement. I realized then that grief, while painful, could be transformed into something lasting, meaningful, and beautiful. Even on the hardest days, when the memories of betrayal and loss threatened to overwhelm me, I found strength in purpose. I remembered Michael's trust, his foresight, and his love, and I knew that he would have wanted me to continue, to build, and to nurture. In the quiet moments, I often sat in the old recliner, letters in hand, feeling a profound connection. Michael had left me more than instructions or evidence. He had left me a chance to heal, to grow, and to make a difference. I had been given a gift in the midst of tragedy, a chance to honor my son's memory in the most meaningful way possible. As I looked out over the neighborhood, the sun casting long shadows across the streets, I felt a deep sense of peace. The battle was over, the truth was known, justice had been served, and Michael's legacy lived on. Not in anger, not in grief, but in the lives I could touch, the lessons I could teach, and the love that never truly left. I whispered into the fading light, "Thank you, Michael, for trusting me, for believing in me, and for leaving me a path to carry on. I'll make sure the world knows who you were, and I'll make sure your legacy lives on every single day." And in that moment, surrounded by memories, letters, and the hum of the workshop, I felt him there, watching, smiling, proud. And I knew, finally, that while the pain of loss would never disappear, it had been transformed into something eternal, something I could carry forward with honor, purpose, and love.